Hello, good afternoon. I'm Sonali Bhattacharyya, and I'm a consultant, content developer, and trainer for Oxford University Press. And today I'm going to be talking about a very interesting topic, leading pleasure reading into structured writing. What we are really going to be talking about is the differences between learning to read and reading to learn. Two different kinds of reading, both of which are equally important for the acquisition of a language, and both of them they have their own strategies for helping internalize all the dynamics of a language. But the difference between these two kinds of readings, that is learning to read, which is more of the intensive kind of reading, and learning to read, how to learn, is again the extensive kind of reading. Now, the reason why we chose this topic was a lot of teachers have been saying that students are not really interested in reading beyond what reading happens in the class. So as a result of which, the lack of reading poses a problem in the acquisition of the language. So we are here to look at how pleasure reading can be enhanced, how students can be egged on to reading a little more, and make this a part of their repertoire. So how do we get children to be interested in pleasure reading? Because once pleasure reading is in place, we see that it becomes an important transferable skill which converts to writing as well. So let's look at why reading is such a problem for our learners. First and foremost, there is a lack of interest, but I think a lot of this lack of interest is largely due to the pressure which comes from the content-driven subjects as well as the content-driven syllabus of the English subject. And as it so happens that the focus of most of what happens in the classrooms is the focus on discrete components of the teaching of English. And eventually it's really the testing of these different aspects of language. So if you are doing a piece of literature, the focus is essentially on the content, the grammar that goes with it, the vocabulary that occurs in context. So those would be the focal points, and the assessment are completely aligned to each of these separate elements of language. But it so happens that research has shown that no matter how hard you focus on preparing for tests or preparing for test activities, it's really the pleasure reading or the extensive reading that learners do that really transfer on to making you a proficient reader of the English language. So, in effect, we are talking about two kinds of reading, the intensive kind of reading and the extensive kind of reading. Now, the intensive kind, or the intensive variety, is it draws upon a shorter piece of text, which may range from about 35 to 40 minutes of focused reading. And there is a lot of instructional support when this is happening, and it is understood that the amount of knowledge that the reader has as far as the input is concerned would range something between knowing 90 to 98% of the content that is coming in. So as a result of which, you do need the instructional support from the teacher. The focus of this textual input would be textual analysis. So which means once the input has been given, there has to be some kind of input, intervention on the part of the teacher. So there are tasks, there are activities. So the focus is essentially on the discrete elements of language. They are being analyzed. The text, in fact, is only a tool which is used to analyze different aspects of the language. Now, the other kind of reading, or the extensive reading, is also called the sustained silent reading, or the SSR, or another acronym, DEAR, which stands for Drop Everything and Read. Now, the purpose of this kind of reading is basically to build your fluency and to build your speed. And ideally, it would be good if you could do it silently. Now, obviously, the input here needs to be longer because there has to be a sustained interest in what you're reading. It does not really need to be analyzed every few minutes. And the speed would vary. Now, for a beginner, speed reading could happen at 150 to 200 words per minute. And as we can see, this becomes a habit-forming thing. Once you get hooked onto what you're reading, you don't stop. You finish something and you want to move on to something else. You want to read something more. And this kind of reading is characterized by level appropriacy. It's important that you pick up something to read that belongs to your level. It's suited to your level and it's suited also to your interest. So you should be interested in the genre that you pick up. And the choice is essentially the readers. It's not usually the teacher who is going to determine what you are going to read. It's the reader's interest and his choice that determines what he picks up. And another very important thing about this kind of reading is that you are expected to know at least 98% of the content and the words of vocabulary in the text. Now, this kind of task, this kind of reading is also characterized by the fact that there are no tasks. There ideally should not be loads of tasks for analysis of the text. So, because this would ruin the interest, and that's also not the purpose of this kind of reading. You're not there to check the disparate elements of language use. It's the content, it's the situation, it's the way a perspective has been presented. These are the things which would be of interest to the reader. So how is it that how do we get our learners interested in this kind of reading? Since we said there should ideally be no tasks as follow-ups, there are some ways in which you could bring in some activities. Of course, you could have some post-reading activities and tasks associated. Some may be related to comprehension, checking comprehension, but checking comprehension would not be one of the focal areas of extensive reading. But currently, we could actually do some kind of assessment to see whether our readers are reading, are on task while they are reading this reading this text. It would be a good idea to monitor and watch them as they read. So this reading could happen while they are sitting in class, or you could give it as work to be taken home, or something that could be done during a weekend or a vacation. And if they happen to be in front of you as you're sitting and watching them, a good way to monitor them would be to look at their eye movements, to look at their body position, to see what kind of engagement is happening while they are sitting with the book, how frequently they're turning pages. So these would be the different ways you could actually be sitting and watching your readers. And of course, you could do a word per minute count. You could count the number of pages they are covering in a single minute and count the words that are covered during each page turn. These are things that also could be done to monitor how fast they are reading. Now, in addition to these activities, you could also have, there are in fact online counters which can help log the number of books that are being used by the learners. And of course, there are different post-reading tasks that can be attached, extensible tasks which can be attached to after when a reader has finished reading his books. Now, you could also have book reports, oral book reports, you could have reviews, summaries, presentations, and posters. All of these could be used to check the extent to which a book has been internalized by a learner once he has read a book. The interesting thing about extensive reading is that it's a highly transferable skill. So what you learn through reading basically transfers very easily to listening and speaking and writing. So here we will be looking at how it can be converted, how it can be seamlessly transferred onto structured writing. But in addition to this, it's also important to note that as you do this kind of reading, as learners engage in this kind of reading, their comprehension skills increase doubly because their higher order faculties are nourished by the incoming input. Their personal experiences become richer, their own schemata building takes place, their global knowledge increases. They also learn how to interpret information, read between the lines, and there is a lot of analysis and synthesis. All of those categories in the Bloom's taxonomy are right there getting nourished by the input which comes in through extensive reading, leisure reading. The learner also learns to develop his points of views, his sensibilities, his response to different kinds of cultures, different emotions. So it's his sensitivity that increases with all these varied and rich input which kind of surround him when he does extensible and extensive reading. So this kind of critical engagement is particularly good when it comes to transferring into these other spaces of listening and speaking and writing. Now, interestingly enough, this kind of reading also strengthens your logic, your sense of logic, your use of logic, your use of analogy, your use of drawing assumptions. You also learn how to identify and locate evidence. So if you have a hypothesis, it's easy to find, because you learn how to do it, you learn how to pick up evidence which would give support to your hypothesis or your assumption. So this hypothesization, as well as looking for evidence and your skill at testing assumptions, these are all skills which come very easily once you become a pleasure reader. Now, another very interesting thing that also develops as you hone your skills in interpreting literature or fictive or non-fictive or any genre that you're reading, it helps to build your experiences. You learn to hear about others' narratives, others' ways of solving problems, others' ways of taking decisions or taking risks and finding a resolution when they face challenges. So these are experientially very, very rich for any reader. And as a byproduct, you also end up learning a lot of vocabulary because you see all the vocabulary taking place in context, in situations, and therefore all of these words are functionally very rich. So these are the very, very rich dividends you get out of reading extensively. Now, I am going to be concentrating on one particular task which you can give your learners, an interesting way of checking to see whether your learners have really captured what they have read, whether they have internalized and assimilated what they have read, and this would be the book review. We would love to see our children using more and more of the book review for meaning making. This is one way to see whether they have comprehended the text and whether they are responding to the text they have read. So to do this exercise, it would be a good idea to look at, to ask the learners to look at the author, to identify the genre that's going to be used in the book, and to take a close look at the dust jacket to see what it says, the summary that it includes about the book and the author, and then to come back to the front and look at the cover, to look at the illustration that goes with the cover, the testimony that writers have put right there in 1 or 2 lines. And once you go inside, take a look at who the publisher is, how many reprints it's had, how often it's being edited, and if you are interested, you could look at the price as well. So if these are the things you begin with, you are ready to move on to the next part. So when we get our learners to talk about a book, it's a good way to get them to do it in a very structured way. So I'm going to show you a few frameworks within which we could get our children to think about a book they have read. So I'll show you a template here. If you look at this template carefully, you'll see it gives us a framework within which to structure your response to a particular book. So when you write a book review, the first thing you need to do is think about certain aspects of the story, and then you need to connect it to your own personal experiences, your perspectives, and then you move on to evaluating the book, and finally you recommend the book or you don't recommend it. So let's look at the first tab then. Think. Think about what? Think about the story itself. What was the story about? Who were the main characters? Were they credible? What did they do? What were the challenges they faced? And who was your favorite character here and why? Next, you get them to think about how it relates to your experiences, your perspectives. So you look at the characters and see if any of those really relate to your life, whether you can kind of understand them better, you can empathize with them. Have you ever done something that felt like the characters were doing? Could you identify with some of those things? Then you move on to the evaluation stage, where you think about what you liked about the book. Can you identify the parts of the book that you really liked? Which would be the favorite part of the book? Would you want to change any part of the book? So these would be the various aspects that you would evaluate. And then finally, you get your learners to recommend whether they would recommend the book to another reader. And why would you recommend it? What kind of a person would you recommend this book to? Why or why not? So once this framework is there in the learner's mind, he would learn to respond to a book appropriately. Now, the next frame that I'm going to show you is where you want to show a learner a writing organizer. Now, this organizer can be divided into a couple of spaces, okay? So right at the beginning, you have something called an introduction. So here is where you are going to be talking about the title, the author, and also provide a brief synopsis. All right. So once this perfunctory work is done, move on to establishing the tone of your review at the beginning of your opening sentence. And then you move on to saying why you like the book or why you don't like the book. And then you talk about some other book which belongs to a similar genre maybe, or another book which has something similar to this one you have read. So you could do a compare and contrast to a similar book. So this would comprise the body of your review. Then you move on to the summary section, where you assemble the key points again and pull out the primary message in the book. And then finally you move on to your own opinion right at the bottom. Who might this book appeal to? And who would you recommend it to? And why would you recommend it? So if this is a basic framework you use when you show your learners how to do a book review, I think it would be a good idea and help them to structure their thinking. Now I'm going to also show you an actual sample of a book review. This will help you to show your learners how to identify these different parts of a review. Now this here is a review of a book, but before we go on to the review of a book, I would also like your learners to look carefully at the cover page. So this here is the cover. Okay, so as you can see, it has a title, it has the author's name, and right on top you have a comment by J.K. Rowling, and she has given the testimony which says why she found this book so amazing. But when you ask a learner to pick a book, make sure you ask some questions prior to the beginning of the reading session. So the first question you need to ask the learner is, what kind of a place is this? If you've got a book like this, so obviously it's a scene that's being shown here. So the good question would be, what kind of a place is this? Who are the persons who are running across the field? Who do you think they are? How old might they be? What does this word castle have to do with the persons who are running across the field? What do you think might be the connection? So these would be the questions that would get the reader thinking about the book and the title. So once this initial stage is done, the readers are now prepared to tackle the book. They have been primed in the prediction skills of looking at predicting what the reading text might be like. Next, we move on to the review itself. This is a review which I have taken from a writer called Lauren. She's 17 years old, and this is the book that she has read with a great deal of interest. So when she does a review on Dodie Smith's novel, I Capture the Castle, as you can see, she has divided her review into several sections. So the first part is the summary. And as you can see, she mentions the author, the title, and she gives a very quick summary. It's underlined there in the text. And she just mentions that it's about a 17-year-old girl called Cassandra, and who has just learned how to do speed writing, so she decides to work on her writing skills by describing the actions and conversations of all those who are around her. Then, in the next paragraph, she moves on to describing the plot, which is done in about 4 or 5 lines. And then once the plot has been stated, she moves on to giving an opinion. So this paragraph is really about the opinion. So what she says there is, while I definitely recommend this book to other readers, I would recommend it to older teenagers, mainly, see, now she gives the reason, mainly because it will resonate better with them. The writing is tame enough, etc., etc. So this is the evidence. So this is her personal opinion. This is how she responds to the text. Then the next paragraph, as you can see, it's got a bubble right there. It says, this portion has the evidence. It proves that she has read it in depth. She has probed deeper into the text. So here, the reviewer talks about how the main character Cassandra undergoes a definite transformation from child to mature young adult, and this is what really left her very, very impressed. You see, there's a line she writes over there. I love that I could see into her mindset and read exactly what she was feeling. So this is a personal response. The personal response continues into the next paragraph. And then she also gives a justification as to why she liked the book so much. She says, Cassandra's narrative voice is wonderful. She's serious at times, but also very witty. So this is what really attracts her. And she's quite exuberant the way she praises the writer's narrative skill, her humor, and how realistic the way the way she narrates the different situations. Her emotions and dialogue, she says, the writer's emotions and dialogues are so genuine. They are on spot for a 17-year-old girl in a situation. So this is how she actually justifies why she likes the book so much. Then she moves on to a section which shows us that she has found this text very, very relatable to. Because she says something like, I personally have had some of the same thoughts as Cassandra, except that Dodie Smith was able to put them into words. So remember, she is writing, she's learning, the main character here is learning how to speed write. And our reviewer here is interested by the process that the main protagonist uses in order to learn how to speed write. So it's an interesting, process within a process that we are talking about here. The review finally ends with a rating. She gives a rating. So she eventually ends with something like, Dodie Smith is an exceptional writer, and I Capture the Castle is a book that will never become obsolete. And she also recommends it to those people who would be interested in historical fiction or romance, and also people who love reading classic books. So this is her recommendation to people who would want to read something like this. So this is how you could actually structure a book review, and you could begin by giving them a template and then give them a sample where the different parts can be shown, or maybe you could take it onto an exercise where they need to identify the different parts and then move on to producing their own reviews. So having said that, I think pleasurable reading is something that can be very, very comfortably transferred from a reading practice into a writing practice. And since the two are so seamlessly connected, there's no reason why this kind of structured writing or review writing could become a repertoire of a learner as he goes through a pleasurable reading experience. Thank you.